Hi, Disability History. It's hard to believe it, but this J-term semester is almost over. It's been really intense and fast-moving, and you've all done a great job of keeping up with the readings and getting really engaged in discussion. So we got one more week to go. That's it. So for our last unit, Module 5, we get to the real heart and soul of disability studies and disability history, and that is the organization and activism of people with disabilities. For much of this class, we felt this pretty depressing burden of oppression and repression and the awful and often heartrending stories of the tragic misunderstandings of people with disabilities throughout history. It's been really tough reading, and imagine how tough it was to live it. But in this unit, we begin to see some hope. We begin to see activism and liberated self-concepts and self-definitions. People with disabilities begin to define themselves in the mid-20th century and to fight to shape their own lives rather than being defined and shaped by others. So what we will do in this module, or our learning objectives, we will learn about the rise of disability activism and civil rights work, mostly after the 1960s. We will learn about some critical laws. First, Section 504 of the 1973 Rehabilitation Act. Second, IDEA, also known as Public Law 94-142, which is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, which was passed in 1974. And then the ADA, the American with Disabilities Act, which is the strongest federal civil rights act for people with disabilities, which was passed and signed in a great public ceremony in 1990. We will also learn about the parameters of contemporary disability rights issues and activism, particularly issues around independent living, assisted suicide, telethon protests, and leadership positions. So given the modern period of this unit, there are a lot of videos, and so plan your week accordingly, about 90 minutes of videos. So here's what you will hear and see. First, there's a 3.5-minute radio podcast on the impact of disability rights on one person, Ben Matlin. Then a terrific 13-minute video about Ed Roberts, who many call the father of modern disability rights, and you'll love him. It's in the 1970s in San Francisco. Then an 18-minute video called The Power of 504, which is more about Ed Roberts. This refers to Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, which made it illegal for any agency receiving public funds to discriminate against anybody solely by reason of handicap, and Ed Roberts really pushes that case. Then a terrific 30-minute video about the dynamic and really transformative Deaf President Now movement at Gallaudet University in Washington, D.C. in 1988. And it's a movement that, much like today's Black Lives Matter movement, erupted from the ground up and took a lot of people by surprise, and it really instigated change in policies and politics. Then a 7.5-minute video on the signing of the ADA in 1990 in this great public ceremony outdoors in Washington, D.C., and watch especially for my favorite part after President Bush signs the law and hands the pen around. And then a 9-minute video about the IDEA and what it has done for special education. IDEA, also known as the Education for All Handicapped Children Act, was finally approved by Congress in 1975. So it's important to note here that a lot of people think about disabilities and know about disabilities because they had a classmate in school with disabilities. But that is only because of the IDEA that came about in the mid-1970s. For those of us who went to school before the mid-1970s, or the 1980s and 90s when the act began to be implemented, and it's still not fully implemented, for those of us who went to school before that time, there were no children with disabilities. For example, I graduated from high school in 1976, and I never in my entire elementary and high school career met any child with any disabilities. Before the IDEA, children with disabilities were not required to go to school, and those children who had maybe minor disabilities were considered simply inferior. For example, my brother David, who's 5 years older than I am, has dyslexia, and the teachers at his school simply told my parents that he was stupid. They didn't know what dyslexia was. It wasn't diagnosed as a condition that that deserved special services. So the IDEA changed all that. Even if insufficiently implemented, now we do have special ed classrooms. We do have kids with special needs in schools, and so kids see other kids who are different, with different kinds of abilities. And so that makes a really, really big difference in how policies and practices have continued to this day. Okay, then there's a 4-minute video about disability rights activists protesting the Jerry Lewis telethon. And it's a really interesting political argument that gets to the heart of much of the contemporary disability rights movement, their call for nothing about us without us, and also no more pity. Then a great 5-minute video about Judy Chamberlain, who's another major leader in the disability rights movement. And then hidden, interwoven within those videos, there's a link to a short written piece by Mary Johnson called Unanswered Questions about the politics of the right to die, which is another major issue in the contemporary disability rights movement. And then 3 other readings. The final chapter of Kim Nielsen's terrific book, an essay by Paul Longmore, who's considered really the father of disability history, and then an essay by Sarah Rose. They're all about the civil rights movements among people with disabilities in the mid to late 20th century. It's all really exciting, and I think you'll get really energized by it. Then there are 3 discussion questions. The discussion forum post is due Tuesday, January 17th at 11:59 p.m. There's no module number 5 quiz. Your module number 3 and 4 quizzes are done, and I will grade them this weekend. Then you have until Friday, 11:59 p.m. to complete the final exam, which is an open book, and also the 2 major assignments. So I may not see you again digitally, at least, this week, but I hope someday to meet you face to face. It's been a great class. You guys are doing great. Have fun this last week.